Coming to today's event, the Galwan clash, India's China strategy and China great game. We are joined with, thanks to Marshal Matheswaran, we are jointly doing with Peninsula Foundation with the support of containment shifting. And we have got outstanding panelists today. And maybe this is one of the, I've seen so many panel discussions on this subject. This is the only panel where I've seen all the three services are well represented, civil service well represented, also an economist is there. So we have Admiral Arun Prakash, former Chief of Naval Staff, Ambassador Parthasarathy is the Chancellor of Central University, Jammu, and also former Indian High Commissioner to Pakistan. General Kamal Dawar is former DG, DIA, and also Mohan Guruswamy, former advisor to Finance Minister, is a great economist, and Air Marshal Matheswaran, veteran Air Force officer. Now, to start with, let me have the privilege of welcome Mr. Peter Remmel. Peter Remmel is the resident representative of Contractors Shifting. MMA and KS have been partner over 30 years. We're bringing some outstanding, and our focus is on empowering entrepreneurship. And let me have the privilege of welcoming Peter Remmel. Also request him to deliver the introductory remark. Before that, a brief profile, brief introduction of Peter Remmel. Is currently the resident representative of Contractors Shifting office in India. He has got a law degree, and after a stint as a jurist, judge, and a lecturer, moved into public office, head of a division of the state, Ministry of Interior, held a number of important assignments, including Anti-Corruption Commissioner, Republic of Indonesia. I was also earlier resident representative of Contractors Shifting Lebanon, Director of Rules of Law. May I now request Peter Remmel to bring a formal introduction to share your German perspective on the themes.
Thanks, Group Captain. Esteemed panelists, ladies and gentlemen, for its neighbors, China has always been an uneasy presence, to say the least. Over the past decade, and much more pronounced now during the corona pandemic, the rest of the world, too, now had its taste of just how difficult dealing with China can be. No matter where we turn the globe, a Chinese presence can be tangibly felt at every corner. I realized that when I was posted in Africa, and on every flight to another African country, I thought I'm on a domestic flight in China, because sometimes you had more Chinese on board than African ones. So the Byzantine nature of the Chinese government, its less than transparent initial reaction to COVID-19, and the apparent pressure to exert it on bodies like the World Health Organization squandered what little goodwill the Chinese government had left in the Western world. The image of the Chinese government abroad was catastrophically bad at the onset of the crisis. And now we are witnessing an entirely new, or shall we rather say old, thinking back of 1962, quality of Chinese utterly ruthless power politics as the drama of the Galwan Valley as well as surrounding areas in Ladakh or Sikkim plays out. This situation reminds me very much to my history teacher. And as you can see, school is also quite some years back for me. So the history teacher told us, observe, when you have anywhere a border conflict in the world, usually it's along somehow artificially drawn lines what do have English or British name. And it's the same in this case. We talk of Johnson Line, McCarthy, MacDonald Line, McMahon Line. All those are still debated, and we are in the 21st century, and they go back to the 19th century. So it goes on. Of course, now we also talk of the line of actual control, where I sometimes ask myself, what does actual mean? Is that something fixed, or can that change day to day? But anyway, that I'm sure you will come back to it. We will hear about the Indian answer to this and China's global aspirations from our esteemed panelists in a moment. So please allow me to sketch out the position of our Konrad Adenauer Foundation with regard to China's great game. I've opened my remarks while stating that the rest of the world is now catching up as to how its neighbors have been feeling about China for decades now. Despite its manifold, sly propaganda efforts, China's image in the Western world has taken a huge hit. Decisions to exclude Chinese firms from lucrative state contracts have been made throughout the Western world. Currently, Pompeo is putting pressure to Europe to simply follow the harsh American line towards China. But Europe's relationship with China is more complicated. On the one hand, There is growing concern and dawning realization that China's aspirations run counter to our core beliefs. But China has become an economic powerhouse that simply cannot be ignored. Most European enterprises have their eyes firmly locked on China, and the supposedly communist country extracts potential political leverage out of its capitalist connections, especially in Southern Europe and the smaller countries where the Belt and Road Initiative is extended to. China's economic power, as also its propaganda, proved effective in pushing Beijing's political agenda. When the division that have plagued the European Union for some time cracked open under the duress of fight against Corona, China was quick to exploit the opportunity. Chinese breathing masks, medical equipment, and personnel arrived in hard-hit areas across Europe, proclaiming even neighborly relations to Italians in Venice. Look at the map, it's quite some distance in between. And also, we had that on the Balkans, that a president there proclaimed the European solidarity is dead. China is much more helpful on that. So opportunistic was China that even it diverted flights carrying medical aid in mid-air as per its changing perception of where or which country better political mileage potential existed. So finding, leave alone agreeing on a common line of action is difficult for Europeans because of the different ties, different connections, different interests. But we at the Konrad Adenauer Foundation believe it's incredibly important to do so, and to do so quickly. Our mission around the globe is the promotion of values like democracy, free press, social market economy, fair social order that allows for personal freedom and development at the same time. This is contingent on a balanced international order in which all actors, big and small, adhere to international rules and common ethos. We believe in cooperation and in progress through mutual understanding. And I think on that one, we do have the same basic understanding than India does. I want to argue on behalf of a cooperative, but at the same time, robust policy, a holistic approach in the spirit of international understanding. We need to find common solutions where possible, but should always remain steadfast in our beliefs and our values and our positions. This is especially vital in the face of provocation, like we experience it. To stand strong, we need to stand together. So it's vitally important to broaden the field of potential partners. India and Europe share values and aims that has natural potential for us to be in close working relationship. We both believe in democracy, the rule of law, as well as a rules-based multilateral world order. Europe, as well as India, are interested in maintaining this multilateral order. We both wish to see the Indo-Pacific remain an international sea, and influence in the regions bordering to it in some way balanced. The Galwan incident made that point. We should not stand alone. So we as a foundation wish to see strengthening of Indo-German and Indo-European relations. Together, India and Europe would be able to provide a much needed counterweight to growing Chinese pressure. I've talked about some of the core values of our foundation already. These values are shared, as I said, between Germany, the EU, and India. To promote them means to foster understanding between our countries, and I believe we can all agree that a deepened understanding, even leading to some kind of formalized or more formalized cooperation, is in all of our interest if we want to face a resurgent and an aggressive, not only any more assertive, but an aggressive and strong China. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Peter, for sharing your perspective on the theme. And now I'll call upon Chairman of the Peninsula Foundation, Air Marshal Matheswaran. He's going to be leading the conversation with 4 outstanding panelists on the team. Before I will request Air Marshal Matheswaran, let me also briefly tell you, there are a large number of viewers watching the program besides Zoom. They're on YouTube, they're on Facebook, they're also on MMA live webinar. As usual, the MMA numbers are flashed on your screen. Please, if you have any question, please send it to them. I will put across to the panelists who will be more than happy to respond to your question. So be short in your question so that we should be able to compile and put it together to the panelists and also to the moderator. Let me have the privilege of introducing Air Marshal Matheswaran, my former Air Force colleague. Air Marshal Matheswaran is an Air Force veteran, and he's also founder chairman of the Peninsula Foundation, and he's a former deputy chief of Integrated Defense Staff at Andaman Nicobar, and also was a SASO of the Eastern Air Command, which is more in discussion now. And also commissioned in the year 1975, flown over 40 types of aircrafts, and also a renowned test pilot of Indian Air Force. And being served in the Eastern Air Command, there could be nobody better than Air Marshal Matheswaran to moderate the session. Over to you, Mr. Air Marshal Matheswaran, to take it forward. Air Marshal Matheswaran.
Thank you, Vijay. Good evening to everybody, and let me welcome everyone on behalf of Peninsula Foundation to this wonderful panel discussion. We have exceptional panelists, as Vijay has already mentioned. We have Admiral Arun Prakash, who's the former Chief of the Naval Staff, and also the Chairman of Chief of Staff Committee from 2004 to 2006. And he's very well known, prolific writer, and he lectures all over the world, and exceptional strategic sense, which is highly respected across the world. We also have Ambassador Parthasarathy, a former High Commissioner to Pakistan, and High Commissioner to Australia, and Ambassador to Myanmar. He's also been advisor to the Prime Minister and the PMO. He is currently the Chancellor of Central University in Jammu, again a prolific writer and commentator, and he's again very extremely well known across the world. We have Lieutenant General Kamal Dawa, the first Director General of Defense Intelligence Agency, when it was set up after the recommendations of the K. Subramanian Committee post-Kargil. And he set up the nuances of the intelligence integration, and therefore he will be the most appropriate person to actually give us the overview on the current issues. He's also had the 2 tenures as commander of the Ladakh region, and obviously is extremely familiar with that entire region, the Ladakh region. We also have Sri Mohan Guruswamy, again extremely well known across the world, and an economist, a China specialist, and a prolific writer and commentator on issues of security, economy, and geopolitics. Sri Mohan Guruswamy was a former financial advisor to the finance minister in the Vajpayee government, and he's been a prolific commentator, and everyone across the world relishes his commentaries. So let us get on to the topic, and the topic is of, as it's already mentioned, it's about the Galwan clash, and what is the real motive of China to have instigated, and the Chinese approach to the border issues. While we've had, on one hand, the presidents and the prime ministers meeting across and working on collaboration on the BRICS and the global issues like climate change, etc., India and China collaborate extremely well. On the other hand, whenever, right from the time the Chinese prime minister first visited in 2013, you had an intrusion. Does that signal something? When Xi visited, when Prime Minister Modi took over, again, there was an intrusion. And then, of course, you had the famous Doklam, problem in 2016, 2017. And now, of course, we have the Galwan, and it's quite a big issue. So from 2010 onwards, you've actually had consistent increase in the proactive, aggressive actions of the Chinese. China and India are the emerging powers, and China has left India behind. We both started together more or less at the same level of per capita income in 1980, and now China's GDP is over 6 times more than India's. The military modernization has taken tremendous progress in China, and these are all issues that we probably need to discuss. And I suppose the way we need to counter China will have to take into a full recalibration with respect to our China policy, China strategy, and how China, looks at, the global issues. I would raise few questions for the panelists, and let me start first with the ground realities. We will, get the panelists talking on a different set of questions for 1 hour, and then we'll open out for question and answers from the audience. So let me start with the ground reality first, and I'll go to General Kamal Davar. How do you look at the issues and the proactive approach of the Chinese military with having instigated the action at Galwan Valley, in the hot springs, in the Pangong Tso Lake, and of course in the Sikkim? All across the border, there are increasing tempo of intrusions and more fierce engagements. And quite obviously, the PLA is not acting without a clear strategic direction at the back at some point of time. So while on one hand, the president engages on diplomacy and a cool approach to economic integration, economic collaboration, on the other hand, militarily, there is a fair amount of push towards the, to grab territory. The Chinese have been practicing the salami slicing over many decades. And therefore, I would like you to comment on what is the issue on the LAC, how do we look at the LAC in the context of 1993 agreement, and what is the motive behind China in this entire process? General Dav.
Thank you, A. Marshal, for getting me. Thanks to the Peninsula Foundation and the Madras Management Association to getting me on your seminar today, this evening. Before I answer your specific question that why, how, and where the Chinese dragon is flaunting its wings, I think it's also better for us to know that the major problem between China and us is part of the baggage of history. We have a 3,488 kilometers border with them, which we divide into 3 areas. The western sector, which covers Ladakh, Aksai Chin and all, the middle sector, where there is not much of a problem. And we have the eastern sector, where there is a total problem in the sense that Arunachal Pradesh, they call it southern Tibet, and they have got claims all over except in the middle sector, which is Uttarakhand and Himachal. Now, what has been happening is, I think the director FES made a mention about the McDonnell-McCartney line, which is 1899, and before that is the Johnson line, which we have adhered to, and that is our claim line. Unfortunately, as far as the Chinese are concerned, despite Pandit Nehru, our first prime minister, trying to get them on international stage, or trying to sort of, he was a pacifist and a dreamer. He wanted, China and India to rise together. Unfortunately, the Chinese already had their strategies clear, and they started building a road in the Aksai Chin area, which came up in 1957. And it's a great pity that India did not even come to know of it till very, very late. After that, they had a claim line in 1959, 1960, and we had the 1962 war. And you mentioned about the line of actual control. Well, the LAC is a term which has been coined by, their former premier Chow En-lai himself. And Pandit Nehru used to say, okay, what is this line of actual control? He never recognized it. India really never recognized it. But in 20th November 1962, at the end of the Indo-China War, the Chinese had more or less, as far as the western sector is concerned, that is Ladakh, the Aksai Chin area and all, they had already annexed whatever they wanted to. But the Chinese, as we know, they are a rising revisionist, expansionist power with superpower ambitions. They don't say that we are a great civilization. They say that we are civilization ourselves. They are now suffering, or I would say infected with that old Middle Kingdom syndrome, where they are the center of the earth and the rest of the world are barbarians. It's amazing how when the world is infected today with a Chinese inspired or inadvertently or advertently, a Chinese generated pandemic, which they're also suffering from, they have found time opportune to needle India. Is this the time? But they have a grand strategy. And we have been very naive, I would say, all throughout our relationship with China. The Chinese say a couple of good words, and we are back to square one. Why do we, you see, if you want to rise as a power, and India has no extraterritorial ambitions, as the world knows. But if you want to rise as a power, as an economic power, otherwise also, you have to have adequate military preparedness. I'm afraid, even despite 1962, we have paid lip service to our overall military preparedness. And that is the reason the Chinese and the Pakistanis and anybody who would be our potential adversaries, they will always make capital out of it, because they know that Indians are jolly good fellows. They get angry, they do something, and they're back to square one. So I would like to just mention here in my opening remarks, as you'd asked me, that we have to be very wary of the Chinese. The Chinese today, as we all know, have intruded since the last, on 5th of May and earlier. They have intruded at 4 distinct places in eastern Ladakh. And they have been, and surprisingly, in Galwan Valley. Do you know, 20th November 62, the so-called line of actual control, they have never come into the Galwan Valley at all. What was the reason now? The reason is simple, because we made this fine strategic road from Darbuk to Shiok to on to Daulat Beg Oldi. So they want to capture the heights. They want to dominate by observation and by fire this strategic road. And now the other day, a couple of days back, they have been also amassing their troops in Depsang, near the Daulat Beg Oldi, where we have got a strategic airstrip at 16,000 feet. They have started coming in and amassing troops. And now what is the situation in eastern Ladakh? I think there can be a localized firefight. I think it's a very serious situation, despite 2 rounds of Corps Commanders talks, despite our foreign minister talking to his counterpart in Beijing and things like that. They blow hot and they blow cold. They have a very amiable ambassador in Delhi who talks very sweetly and very nicely. But all said and done, as Ambassador Parthasarathi would agree with me, that you have to be wary of the Chinese. Forget their sweet talk, for God's sake. Please do your minimum preparedness. Otherwise, you will always be backstabbed by the wily, crafty Chinese.
Thank you, General. One of the questions that will certainly come up, which we can answer later, is that for the current situation, would you see something, some kind of a shortfall in the intelligence performance, intelligence apparatus? I think that's something we need to look into. Let me come to Ambassador Parthasarathi. So you know the Pakistani extremely well. You know the Chinese extremely well at the back of your hand. Let me start with the first. I think we need to go back into history. Although people keep saying, a lot of things have not. We need to look forward and be in 21st century. But to start with, in '54, when we finally recognized Chinese sovereignty over Tibet, it is said in some of the writings and new research where they point out that India gave in without getting anything in reciprocal terms. The principle of reciprocity was never followed by the Chinese. They got away clean by getting their sovereignty, but they never, gave in anything to address our issues in Kashmir, or later when Vajpayee probably got the Sikkim recognition, that was the only sort of saving grace. That is one point. That's a starting point. Since then, when the post-62, when they said they will now hold on to what is known as what we call as the line of actual control now, is their area which they should hold, and they are holding on to that. But from '93 onwards, when the Treaty of Peace and Tranquility was signed, and from then on, their interpretation of LAC is completely different and at odds with our way of interpreting, which means simply, as far as they are concerned, they're not holding the position that they held in 1993, but they keep moving forward, slicing, what we call a salami slicing, and inching in. One of the scholars says that this is an approach to keep India bottled up in its South Asian domain so that it doesn't create kind of a nuisance for China's global ambitions. Which means he says China's primary strategic sector is in the east towards the Pacific. Towards India, it is a secondary strategic sector. And therefore, they won't be interested in escalating any further, but keep pushing you aggressively. And most of our actions have been reactive. So how do you look at this entire process from a China policy that we followed so?
I've lost visual contact with you. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir, I can hear you.
Well, let me put it this way, that, we make a fatal mistake by talking of us being fellow Asians and therefore great friends. We never have a history of conquest. China sort of extols in conquest and empire. But historically they haven't been very successful. Right now, there is no question that since Deng Xiaoping's, I would say, brilliant leadership, they have risen in a way economically, and the military strength has followed, is remarkable in the annals of world history. It's been a remarkable rise, and I think we should acknowledge that about the Chinese. Coming to what you said, Marshal, about they're wanting to confine us to South Asia. No, I'm sorry, I can't agree with that. They want us to confine ourselves to what is India and then cut down the size of India. Let us not forget that today, Pakistan's nuclear weapons, their missiles, and for nuclear weapons, even their plutonium production facilities, are all supplied by China. As an American friend told me, without China, there is no Pakistan nuclear weapons program. So strategic containment of India is integral to their political and strategic thinking. They have done that now, following up, but that's up and down because they don't know how to work with democracies. They go up in Sri Lanka one day, come down the next day. They may be up in Nepal and down again because they don't know how to handle democracies. But you should be very, very clear that the primary aim of Chinese foreign policy is strategic containment of India. There is a military element to it because we share a common border. And the other thing is they do get nervous at times. I still recall when I was in Moscow in 71, they were pretty careful about not getting involved, though they knew their protege was, going down under. So they are a realistic people, but let us be very, very clear. They do not bear any friendship or affection for us. They see us as the largest country capable at least of putting together a group of nations which can balance and deal with Chinese power and irredentism. Therefore, I go back to the basics. They have problems with all their major neighbors, starting with Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, come down to Philippines, Indonesia, most importantly, Vietnam. They all have problems with them, territorial. They have used force against all of them. It's different. They got a thrashing from the Vietnamese in 79. So I think we should be very, very clear that we are dealing with a country which is expansionist and wishes to contain us. There's far too much romanticism. And very frankly, in my view, to deal with them, they have coined a beautiful term called comprehensive national power. We have to bear that in mind. It's not just military, it's economic. Most importantly, for the first time, we're giving up our old thoughts about being non-aligned, which was really a sort of illusion. We are now striking multiple alliances to deal with this. The joining of the Quad is there. I don't know how much will come of it because the Americans can change policy tomorrow morning if Trump gets a good deal, and hopefully he won't be there after November. He will just go back to looking for that deal with China economically. So I think we have to build partnerships where everybody benefits. This is in the East. In the West also, we have now extremely good relationships with the entire Gulf Cooperation Council. Their investments are large, it's booming economically. And I hope that once we get over this corona issue in another year or two, we can bring that to normalcy. But right now you have two problems: the immediate and the longer term. I think immediately we have to ensure that there are no further territorial gains. They have taken over Pangong, so they have moved in pretty close to the road in the Galwan Valley, but we can hold them. They slipped through an entire mechanized division, which we found out in due course, but we can manage it. We need to remain united. Our diplomacy needs to be very effective. I mean, with our neighbors and extending across Asia. If you go anywhere in Asia, the most unpopular power is the People's Republic of China. This is particularly a feature of Xi Jinping. It was not a characteristic, this expansionist characteristic, aggressive characteristic of previous leaders, certainly starting with Deng. But perhaps they believe that the time has come for now to get aggressive. So handle them is going to be multidimensional. Strengthen your own economy. Make sure that we do have some loopholes in various things which need to be done in defense. Those get done. And be prepared to deal with it, because they have not yet quite got to the road which they would like to do to Depsan. And these are the security side. But most important, go by what they call as comprehensive national power. We can't even, ever since we've been in this process of liberalization, we have lost track of having a sophisticated industry. You have Huawei running the show. You have 70% of their Indian telephones being manufactured with no local content. And even the management is Chinese. I think all this, we need to set our house in order. Economically, politically, I have great faith in our unity and our democracy. I think we can handle it. But economically, yeah, I think Mohan Guruswamy will be in a much better position to articulate this than I can. But I think really we should seriously start looking at this pattern of economic relationship that has emerged with China. And I think certainly we could start with ensuring that Huawei is not a part of that planning. Having it in India is not a part of that planning. And I hope our German friends would also bear that in mind. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Absolutely right. I think economic, that is somewhere where we could have learned a lot of lessons from the way Deng Xiaoping laid out the strategy and, worked on building up the entire process. Let me come to Admiral Arun Prakash. Sir, you've been the naval strategy and as a naval chief, you will understand, you will be able to explain that far better on how we could handle the Chinese. And I think you brought up beautifully in the article that you've written yesterday in the Indian Express. Yes, it's very important, and I think Kissinger has also very well, discussed that. We are passionate about chess, but is chess now keeping us locked up into tactical domain, as you mentioned there? And the Weiqi that the Chinese call it, their game is is it sort of not letting us see the bigger picture? That is one issue. Being an aviator yourself, now if you want to actually tackle the Chinese instead of being reactive, why don't we actually move into a deterrent posture where the air power is brought into play? Now that the Chinese have violated or not respected the agreements of 93 and 96 that we've actually been religiously holding on to, why don't we actually now move ahead and bring in air power? And the same way, why can't we actually create a larger dimension of strategy in which the Chinese will get the concern if the Andaman Nicobar Islands are fully activated? It becomes a Pearl Harbor for India. And then you actually put the fear of God into their shipping lanes. Would that be the way to look at it? And I'm sure you would have discussed as the chairman and Chief of Staff with the political leadership. Why is it that this is not materialized? So yours.
Thank you, Marshal. Well, I think we need to step back a little and look at history before we look ahead although people say.
So your voice is.
Post,
Yeah.
can you hear me?
Yeah, not better, sir. There was a
Okay.
break in between.
Okay. After every conflict, the world over, the two belligerents get together, sit around a table and negotiate for various reasons, prisoners of war, this, that, and the other, but mainly to remove the casus belli of the conflict. In the 1971 war, we did that. Soon after the war ended, we got together in Shimla and decided various things. It's another matter that we didn't get a good bargain out of that. But after the 1962 conflict, we have never bothered to negotiate anything with the Chinese for 25 years. And when we actually got down to the negotiating table, something that came out was something called LAC, line of actual control. And today we understand that we have our image of the line of control, actual control. The Chinese have their own image, and neither is told the other what it is on the ground. I understand, and I think Ambassador Parthasarathi can tell us more, that there was some talk about exchanging maps and so on. But this situation says the Chinese say, we know where the LAC is, but we won't tell you. So that's possibly the most ridiculous situation. I think we should have tackled this issue at the topmost urgency and got them to commit where they think the LAC is, get it marked on the map, and then you can move on from there. The other part of history is that 49 when the civil war ended and 47 when we became free, we had different visions. The Chinese vision obviously extended far further than ours did, and they saw themselves already in 49, just out of the civil war, as eventually a world power, a nuclear power, etc. And then in their mental picture, they had placed India at a certain place, whereas India very ideally thought that we could get along together and become Asian powers. And so that was Nehru's vision. So we miscalculated. And I think we've been miscalculating all along for 70 years. Even till today, we don't know enough about China. We have not invested enough intellectual capital, intelligence resources, research, etc. So today, when the Chinese do something strange, there's complete flap in Delhi. People are running around like headless chicken, and there's confusion, etc. So I think we need to study China. The third point is that since 1995, the Chinese have been issuing biannual defense white paper. Till now, they've issued 11 white papers. They're available in the public domain. If you read one of them on the internet, you'll see how the clarity of thought that they have, what they intend doing, what kind of armed forces they need, what kind of financing the armed forces need. All that is spelled out, and had anybody read those defense white papers, perhaps we would have got a clue about what's likely to happen, what's happening in South China Sea, and what's likely to happen on our borders. So that is all in the past, what we should have done and possibly what we should be doing now. But coming to the present situation, obviously they are bearing down on us, whatever their vision is of being a world power or Yangtze or that kind of stuff. So they are bearing down on us. They are testing our tolerance and how much they can push us, and they have pushed us enough on the line of actual control. So we should push back now. We should actually go forward to our interpretation of the line of actual control and sit there. And as you rightly point out, we've got plenty of air power. Our air combat aircraft are going to take off from on the planes from 2,000-3,000 feet above sea level. They can carry far more payload, they can carry more weapons, more endurance, and so on. Whereas the PLA Air Force is operating from 13, 14, 15,000. Their takeoff runs are huge, their engine performance, etc. So the air power is certainly very significant, and we should show our air power. We don't have to use it. So that's one that we should push back strongly against what they are doing right now. At the same time, Ambassador Parthasarathi mentioned our military-industrial complex, which is in a pathetic state after 70 years. Prime Minister has mentioned Atmanirbharta, etc. This is the time to go for it. Start something new. So these are the things that we can do on the ground immediately. Little out, we also need to engage China seriously in negotiations, diplomatic, more political than diplomatic, and pin them down and say, okay, we will not leave the negotiating table unless you tell us what is your interpretation of the line of actual control. And we should negotiate in a package, whether it's trade, whether it's culture, whether it's any other topic. It should all go hand in hand until the LAC is pinned down. we will not leave the negotiating table and tell the whole world there is no precedent anywhere in the world where two large countries do not have a recognized border. So we need to get our European friends on board. We should get all our other people on board and say, here we want to negotiate with this huge looming power, and they are not negotiating with us over a simple thing like having a common border. And lastly, of course, we need to reach out to our allies, friends, etc. The Quad has been very sort of tentative. Every time China hears the term Quad, they start talking about containment, and then Xi Jinping makes a loud noise, everybody runs for cover. So the Quad, none of the Quad members have been serious. China, Japan is worried as hell, but they are sitting right at China's doorstep. Their armed forces are not really up to the mark, although pretty sophisticated. Australia is so indebted in terms of trade to China that they don't dare to buck them. So India is the only power which has a border with them. And now we are in a serious situation. So I think this is the time for India to stand up and ask people, come on, stand up and be counted. If you're a member of the Quad, then let's do something about it. And as was mentioned earlier, there are other countries who are suffering under the Chinese heel. Vietnam is one, will be ready to jump on your bandwagon. Malaysia, Philippines, Indonesia. So let's get them together and form what was formed in Europe 150 years ago, the Concord of Indo-Pacific. We can call it anything we like, but let's get moving on this and send a strong message to China. So you mentioned air power, then I'd like to mention maritime power also. China is hugely vulnerable to sea lanes being threatened. And it was not us, it was Deng Xiaoping who mentioned the Malacca dilemma. What's a Malacca dilemma? Nobody in India knows about it. But the Chinese thought about it because their trade passes through the Malacca Straits or the Sunda Straits or the third strait, and they are vulnerable. An Indian destroyer or a small force of submarines can play havoc into them. The Andaman Nicobar Islands sit at the mouth of the Malacca Strait, through which China's trade passes. Trade, energy, their industry is dependent. China is the biggest importer of energy in the world. You threaten their tankers, oil tankers, you threaten to interrupt them. There will be panic in China, I assure you. So these are options which are available, and we need to exercise them. If we are going to go to the negotiating table, which we must, then we must go from a position of strength by showing our army's power, our air power, wherever it's available, and also our maritime power. Let's not forget any of these elements of comprehensive national power that Ambassador Parthasarathi mentioned.
Thank you, sir. Absolutely right. Unless we actually not just look at only at the LAC and the border, unless we have a comprehensive approach to dealing with China, the solution or the effectiveness of our strategy may not, bear fruit.
And one last word: we must get our strategy going. For 70 years, we've had no strategy. Not only should we have a national security strategy, we need a China strategy. Like the USA has issued an Indo-Pacific strategy, we need a China strategy. How are we going to manage China for the next 100 years?
That actually leads to a very important question, which I'll come to it later after I finish with Sri Mohan Guruswamy. Mohan, this is obviously now having reached a certain position in terms of economic power, the political clout and international clout, and technological power and military modernization that is ongoing in China. Despite the pandemic and the downturn in the global economy, China has China been emboldened to initiate this kind of a conflict with India or this kind of a problem with India? Is there a bigger global economic and comprehensive game plan from the Chinese side? Quite simply put, is it part of the power transition struggle between the US and China, and India is a fall guy in this?
Well, I think the reality is that the rest of the world has made China very rich in the last 25 years. If you take the year 2000 as the major point of the world, that the USA, Japan, and Europe have each year contributed an average of $500 billion of trade surplus to China. India has also, that means, in the last 20 years, the world has given them $10 trillion. And India has not been a slouch either. In the last 10 years, We've given them about $400 billion at trade surpluses. The trade surpluses have enriched China. They've become a rich country because of the trade surpluses. Countries either grow by themselves or they get money from abroad and become rich. Earlier days, you had to capture countries and exploit them. Today, you exploit them by competitive advantage and selling goods at a good price. The Chinese have become rich at the world's expense. And even as Trump has been talking for the last 2 years, the trade deficit between the US and China has gone up to $350 billion. Now, something the world needs to look at very carefully. Trump and Obama before that had flagged off a very important topic. Obama said this is a pivot towards the East and we must look at how China is growing and why it is growing and who is contributing to the growth. And therefore, we've forgotten these topics, we've taken these topics off the agenda, and then we keep merrily trading with China, merrily buying from China, and then, we know that they become rich, they're becoming irascible, they're becoming insufferable. The point is that, in India, we've invested so much of goodwill on China. It's quite amazing. I've been, I think, doing lectures in China for the last 25 years, 2-3 times a year. They're very fond of me because, they like somebody to come and give them a good hectoring. And they have an unconcealed dislike for India. And this is something which we must realize. As a civilization, they look down on our civilization, they look down on us, and China has this attitude that they are far superior to us in all respects, in their discipline, in their behavior, and how they've grown. And they have reason to be proud. Till 1996, they were a $1 trillion economy. Now they are close to 13 trillion. India was not doing too badly. We were 8 years behind. In 2004, we were 1 trillion. After that, we started languishing. We get, carried away by all our temporary growth, and we haven't made the investments. If you look at our capital expenditure to GDP ratio in India for the last 10 years, it's been coming down. Economists have been warning this government. Everybody has been warning this government and the previous government that you've got to get this up, and they are just not able to summon the political will to make capital. And they're quite happy importing from China because the import lobby is very powerful. Every year they have announcements that we cannot import firecrackers from China. But container load doesn't come. They pass through customs. Every year we have notification that kites cannot be imported, that manja cannot be imported, but it comes. So they have got a measure of it. And we have a large Indian community living in Yiwu with these traders from North India mostly, who have Chinese families, Chinese wives in Yiwu, and families in India. And they've got a huge, powerful import. And there's a lot of undeclared trade. This is the Hawala trade which goes on in China and India, which circumvents our duty structures, our tariff structures, and comes in India at a very low price. So all this needs to be looked at. We've been talking of having a China study group and a China office in the government of India for many years, but nothing ever comes out of it. And Prime Minister Modi has, in the last 6 years, made so many trips to China and so many photo opportunities. What has come out of it? These reports have been go into government, people like me keep writing, and we keep piling up there, and they say, okay, these are all the traditional fears, and we shall surmount it when the time comes. The fact is that we've been trying to conceal the truth from our people, just like Nehru tried to conceal in 1959, 1960, 61, 62. The Chinese moved into Galwan in May, and in Pangong, so from finger 8 to finger 4 in May. There's enough evidence of that, and we didn't react to it. We were hoping to tide it over somehow. And when they come, only when things really got out of control, when it came 1.4 kilometers from the road, then we started making a noise. Then we woke up. Now, you cannot allow this kind of, even now the truth is not known. What happened that day? You should tell the people of India what's happening. and you unleash a jingoism now, which you can't control. People in India are mad. They want a reaction, they want an action. And the Chinese are trying to contain this reaction in India by not telling how many people they lost in Galwan. Their casualties, I'm told, have been pretty high themselves. But we've got to deal with China very cleverly, carefully. We can't suddenly now cut off trade with them because, our pharmaceutical sector, and we've seen this happening, has developed a dependency on China. 70% of our API comes from China. If you don't import your API, then, you don't have a pharma sector. And why do we keep importing? We were making these intermediates in India. We had to shut them down because we have all these Western standard environmental laws. So, it just does not become profitable to make it here. It's cheaper to import. Every laptop in India comes from China. Every iPhone, smartphone is either made in China or most of it comes from China. So we're not importing rubbish from China, as popular belief that we're importing Ganeshas and kites. We're importing critical stuff from China now. There's a dependency. You can't cut it one day. And why is China able to make, you see, you're sitting in Chennai, you saw the Nokia factory, the biggest phone factory had come up outside Madras and Tirupati, and it was shut down because the DMK, AIDMK had rival trade unions and they fought. They had labor trouble. And then the IT department arrived on Nokia, gave them huge notices, and Nokia just got fed up with it, they're going. And now when Foxconn is wanting to take it over, still there's talks, negotiations going on, and that factory is still lying idle. Now, if you want to get serious in this, you got to get serious with labor reforms. Every time a unit has more than 11 workers, it gets liable for a union. Once you get a union, the politicians arrive. And productivity is very low in India because we've got this ridiculous trade union. I've run a factory having 1,200 employees. I know how difficult it is to get production out, which is why companies like Maruti, majority of the workers are contract workers. So we've got to get labor. It's today difficult to buy land. Who can set up a new factory in India? Because in this competitive populism, the previous government said that we will make sure that land is not sold to industry so easily. Then the BJP, who was in opposition at that time, made noises and you still want to give away land cheap. So the Manmohan Singh government said 6 times the market value. Who is going to pay 6 times the market value for an acre of land? Which is why you have not got any new industrial investment in the last 20 years. And that trend is showing in capital expenditure decline every year. So, unless you wake up and sort out your country's own domestic policies, you will not be able to deal with China. And this nibbling will continue. And even now, we're wishing that it will go away. Like Admiral Arun Prakash said, you've got to think the unthinkable now. I have written the other day that it's going to be very difficult to prevent interdiction of that road from Darbuk to DBO. I've also been in that sector, so I know how difficult it's going to be. You've got to get into the air power very fast. And you've got to semaphore this to the Chinese very fast that we are moving up to one more dimension. And if you go to the second dimension, you go to the third dimension, which is the sea. And that's where the Chinese are most vulnerable. He's right. But I remember having spoken to one NSA and I said, we should do some exercises of season board tankers, of our own tankers in the highway. So, the Chinese have a problem saying that you skin the cat to scare the monkey. So you got to tell them that what's happening in our minds. Do some long range flights, refueling flights. But no, we don't want to provoke them. So you got to semaphore the Chinese with intent. We unfortunately not have failed in doing so. They think of us as a namby-pamby people, and they'll continue to do this. So I think it's time to wake up and realize that the kind of neighbor we have, the kind of adversary, and we talk of being a challenge to them in Asia. We're not going to be a challenge to them for a long time. Our GDPs are very different now. This year, the military budget is going to be $190 billion. Where are we now? in comparison with that. And they have a huge military industrial complex. We're still not able to get the LCE off the ground. We're still not able to make a tank. We're still not able to get our second aircraft carrier into the sea. In the meantime, the Chinese have put 2 carriers into float, and those carriers are now patrolling on the Taiwan Straits. So I think we're going to get a national purpose going behind. This is a good opportunity to get this country together. And there's also a good opportunity to talk about LAC. You can't have a border with 2 LACs. Their LAC and our LAC. The problems come because, our perceptions differ. And you should let the military define an LAC as a defensible military line. You don't give the military that say. The military is not even in policy making. The military is a department of the government. It's like the Road Transport Corporation, a department of the government. So, you've got to sort out our situation very clearly. This is an existential threat to India, if not today, next decade or so, because, our GDP is going to keep growing because we're in a growth trajectory. And if we continue with this average of 6-7%, we will be pretty close to China in 2050. And China, are they going to allow that? I doubt it. We'll have to think carefully about this. Yeah, Marshal?
Yeah, thank you. I was muted. Let me come to raise one question for Ambassador. Admiral Arun Prakash mentioned about the white paper, and as a country that we are very clearly, we have the potential, and we will be a great power in the global governance system. And when we have those aspirations, what prevents us from bringing out white papers and national security strategy into the open? It is not that we don't have an understanding internally. Certainly, of course, we have. But then why can't? Because it's a system that sends clear messages to the rest of the world, and then it also binds you into a very clear long-term strategic process. Why is this not being done?
The answer is, it is ideal to have one. But first, the Admiral will agree with me on this one, because he and I have worked on committees together. Getting the Air Force, the Army, and the Navy together on one is not so easy. And I think I can see Admiral Arun Prakash smiling on that one. And you Air Force guys are also a part of it. Now, the fact of the matter is that you have to have a will. As Mohan says, we have deindustrialized. We could have built our electronics industry if we had gone about it the right way with Taiwan. Now the Americans have grabbed it, and the entire Taiwan setup is shifting to Arizona. We have to have a very clear will. And I can assure you, without going into so many details, there are many things more we need to do to make our armed forces as effective as they should be. So I think there is a paralysis of understanding of what is required. There's no point in us sitting on a rooftop and saying we're a great power. Great powers don't do what we have done. There's an armored division which is coming to the Galwan Valley. So let us be realistic. I think we can hold the Chinese. I don't believe the Chinese are 10 feet tall. First of all, let's shed this impression and deal with build our own comprehensive national power, as they call it. Do it effectively. There is a national consensus. Look at our democracy. 17 national languages, every religion in the world, different cultures, but we live together as one. That is our strength. And unless you harness that strength and go about these things realistically, yes, I hope we stand firm on Galwan. There is no need to be jingoistic. We should be ready to talk with them. But it's going to be a long feeling. And I'd go back to both the Admiral said and what Mohan repeated. Tie them down. Every time you sit with them, say, please define where your line of actual control lies. And then we'll talk. Expose them. Go to the press and say, Impossible to talk to these guys. They don't even define what they want. They keep that ambiguous, and you are gets squeezed for space. I think far more realism in dealing with them, and finally, maritime power, which I would like to refer to you. That is their Achilles heel, the
Absolutely.
Straits of Malacca. And once we get our Russian acquisitions or whatever, and we build up our fleet, I think their greatest care of this Quad will be its ability to deny them entry into the Indian Ocean. That will squeeze them because that is where they need. You don't have to get into a war. You don't have to get into a conflict. But together with the Indonesians and the Vietnamese and the Quad, you certainly have the power to mobilize, to at least tell the Chinese to behave. As we have gone into every maritime dispute, they set their law, they define the borders, the international tribunal rules against them, they disobey it. And our American and Western friends, too scared to say anything. So if I will always tell the Americans, nice to talk, but put your money where your mouth is.
That's right.
You know, and build the alliance, because I think China has shaken the world, and even the otherwise placid Europeans has been shaken. So let's build on that. Don't rush into a hurry. Rome is not built in a day. Negotiate with them and keep tensions manageable and keep our lines of communication open. That's all I can say.
Thank you, sir. So let me continue that with Admiral Arun Prakash in the context of, the white paper and the strategy part. Why aren't we focused on clearly establishing a conventional deterrence on an active defense or an aggressive posture, integrating the services? Because, like you said, and we all know, the Chinese are not going. They can easily be tackled if even with the existing forces, as long as we are not looking to go and occupy any of the territories on the other side. And therefore, it's no more, a scene of 62 anymore. They also know that quite well. And therefore, their strategy is also to keep needling us. Why are we giving the initiative to them? On the other hand, why don't we take the initiative till such time, like you said, here is the LAC, let's come to an agreement, let's exchange maps, and then let's settle down. That is one point. Second is, of course, in the context of naval power, given the kind of development lethargy that happens in our system, the Chinese have an ambition of getting at least 3 carrier task forces operational by 2030. How do we now accelerate the process of developing the Andaman Nicobar Command and naval air power, and the Chinese aviation capability, the way they've actually developed over the last 25 years? They've stopped at nothing. They've stolen, they've collaborated, they've compelled and coerced, countries like Ukraine to part with technology. What is wrong in our approach? Critical technology control is a problem, as I always constantly keep saying that. And then there seems to be a lack of strategy there. So yours.
Well, to start with, if we don't know where we are going, then we don't know how to get there. So that's the importance of having a strategy or some kind of plan. But for 73 years, we balked at writing down anything because the politician probably feels that if something is put in black and white, then he'll be called to account for it. So one way or the other, we've avoided making a strategy or a doctrine. Therefore, that every time a crisis arises, we react with, our reactions are incoherent and knee-jerk. So the first thing is to sit down and write a strategy and say, what are your national aims, interests, objectives, who are your adversaries, etc. How do you plan to deal with them? Not for 5 years, not till the next election, but for the next 25, 30, 40 years. China is looking at 2049. They've been looking at it for a long time, where they want to go, what kind of forces they have. So the first thing is for our politicians to sit down and produce a national security strategy. And as I said, specifically a China strategy, because that's the biggest threat to us in every sense. So that's one. We've tried it many times, as Ambassador Parthasarathi says, but the politician is not willing. His attention span is too small. His attention span is to the next election, general election, and now it's come down to the next state election. That's no way to run a country. You cannot deal with a power like China by focusing on electioneering and petty politics. So that's one. And your next question about how to muster naval power, it comes back to the same thing again. Slogans are cheap, easy to put out, but implementing a slogan is difficult. We've been hearing this self-sufficiency, self-dependence, etc., but nothing has happened on the ground. Why? Because a politician makes a slogan, he leaves the implementation to the bureaucrat. The bureaucrat has other preoccupations. Even the politician does not focus himself enough on that. So China bought both China and India bought second-hand aircraft carriers from Russia. China took it home, fixed it herself, and put it out to sea in 3, 4, 5 years. We didn't have the capability. We sent it to Russia. The Russians skinned us economically, financially, and took a lot of time and gave it back to us. Our third carrier is languishing in Cochin because all it takes is for the defense minister to visit Cochin and say, where is the carrier? What's happening to it? China has produced a brand new carrier designed and produced in 3 to 4 years. So sloganeering has its own place. It will win you elections. But if you want to get anywhere on the ladder of powers in the world, you have to implement those things and you have to have a strategy. As far as military industrial complex is concerned, we have one of the world's largest military industrial complexes, which consists of DRDO, of defense PSUs, ordnance factories. What do we produce? Zilch. We are importing 850,000 carbines from Czechoslovakia. A tender for 2 lakh bulletproof jackets is out today. So there's got to be a minister for defense production. The prime minister, he should report directly to the prime minister and report to him where we are today, tomorrow, day after tomorrow. So unless we do these things, slogans will not get us anywhere. I think we need to face up to that.
Absolutely, yeah. Very well said. Let me come to General Dawa, and I raised that issue of the intelligence. And you've been the founding person for the DGDIA. In coming to the current context, in the way the Chinese have moved in Pangang Tso and Hot Springs, etc. We have a system where the borders are in certain areas managed by the ITBP, and then you have a dual control between Home Ministry and Defense Ministry. And does all that come into play in playing negatively in the way how intelligence gets marshaled and acted upon?
Yeah, that's a very fine question. But before that, a couple of very, very brief interventions on what the Admiral said. As far as the line of actual control is concerned, these varying perceptions, there is, from our side, we've been asking the Chinese side, whenever our special representatives meet, and there are 5 protocols about border management and things like that. As far as the line of actual control is concerned, we have been asking them, let's exchange maps, your perception and our perception, and then we can, with a bit of a mutual give and take, we can arrive at that. But the Chinese have been very smart. They have been very ambiguous as far as the line of actual control is concerned, because it suits them and it suits their salami slicing tactics. That was one. Number 2, as far as maritime power is concerned, the Admiral knows it better, that it is not only the Malacca Straits dilemma which the Chinese are facing, and we've got this solid, formidable Andaman and Nicobar command. Our Western fleet can also ensure, and if the Quad comes in, then we can totally ensure that the Chinese also get on to the Straits of Hormuz dilemma. So, from on both sides, both seaboards, we are well off as far as the Navy is concerned. So I'm sure that the Chinese also know. So that's another thing to our advantage. Now, coming to your question regarding intelligence, you see, and first I'll come on to the ground as to what exactly has happened. Now, there has been a fair amount of build-up taking place over the last many months. They've crossed the LAC at some places after the 5th of May or around the 5th of May or so. So we have in Ladakh, and this is part of the Kargil Review Committee report, which was a very fine recommendations were made. And one of them was that each border will have one paramilitary force or a police force, a central police organization. But I'm afraid wherever the border is active 24/7 or 365 days a year, just to have the Indo-Tibetan Border Police or the BSF is not really a prudent thing, or the Assam Rifles in the eastern sector. Now, as far as Ladakh is concerned, you know that the Chinese have been nibbling away at your territory for years on end. Maybe a couple of months later they come and the border patrols meet, and sometimes they go back. And we have been, I think, keeping our eyes shut. And this is where I would say that, for God's sake, and this is my appeal to Army headquarters and the senior Army hierarchy and the MOD, please get hold of the MHA, sit down together and review this recommendation of this one border, one force. The fact is, if I had anything to do, it would be under command. The ITBP will be totally under command, the Army there, and so that proper manning, surveillance of the borders is done. I was also there for exactly 2 years. I know how thin we were on the ground, but I used to, without orders, without taking any permission, till my senior commanders came to know that what the hell are you doing. I used to send my infantry companies there, or for under the garb of terrain familiarization and area familiarization and all that, and acclimatization. So I used to pump in a lot of guys even before before I was pulled up and all that. But the point I'm trying to mention is that in Ladakh or anywhere else along our borders, wherever it is an active live border, please let the Army handle it, and all the others can be used either for internal security, or they can be put totally under command of the Army. Otherwise, you'll have duality in command, duality in intelligence gathering is always bad, as we have seen in Kargil, and I hope this does not become another Kargil.
Thank you, sir. Let me come to Mohan with respect to the military expenditure or military modernization, the way we've actually been doing. To have an effective and conventional deterrence, it's time that you actually need to send a message across that we will use force, we will use air power if you actually cross this line. Right, and therefore the military power needs to be constantly kept, with their powder dry. Much of our military capability must be rooted in indigenous capabilities as well. So we have been off and on. We pump in money at a certain time when there's a crisis, then we switch off, and capital acquisitions and capital allocations slow down. Why aren't we looking at defense expenditure as part of a larger dimension of defense economy, which contributes to national power far more? Because if you look at how France devised its national strategy on building its defense industries and indigenous capabilities, I think one needs to go back to their policies that were created in post Second World War. Why aren't we looking at defense economy as a very vital segment of Indian economy? Because it creates jobs, it creates skill levels, it creates education, it creates export capabilities. Why aren't we looking at that in that dimension? Mohan, you have to unmute. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Among the first things you learn in economics, I think in the third chapter, is that countries make a guns and butter choice. That either you spend money on guns or you spend it on butter, which is a totally fallacious argument. It was used to illustrate in a book of Samuelson on choices. But most Western economies are guns economies. The US, the military industrial complex is the biggest contributor to the GDP and to the jobs. It's the same in Europe, it's the same in France, even Germany, with all its talk of being peaceful, has the active military industrial complex. Russia, of course, we know has a military industrial complex, but we still make these choices in India. And we do not allow whatever little military we've got, complex we've got, industrial complex, to be modernized and to be up to date. Today, if you go to the ordnance factory, this is a mess. I can see why nobody wants to buy a gun made in Kasipur or Ishapur. I can see why nobody. If we have a vehicles factory in Jabalpur, we doesn't produce vehicles. We have a tank factory in Avadi, we doesn't produce tanks. So, when I was in government, I said we must have a white paper on defense production. And a very big man was advisor to the Raksha Mantralaya. So my minister said, "Are you on mad? You want Bharat Ratna to give a white paper?" So, but we need to ask hard questions as to what is this investment doing? It doesn't contribute to GDP. It's become a load on us. It adds to our costs. And we've got to get economic returns on everything. Look at the way we're dealing with Air India. It's 53,000 crores down the hole. And we're still not able to shut it down. So, it's time to talk of strengthening the country economically, and therefore by harnessing our resources well and using it well. Now I'm looking at this madness now going on that we will not buy Chinese. If you don't buy Chinese, will you buy from Taiwan, you will buy from Malaysia, you will buy from Japan or Korea. But you're still going to pay in hard currency. You pay the Chinese in hard currency. So why not get the cheapest? So these ridiculous notions we have. And we've internalized all this rubbish that goes on in our media, among our leaders, among our opinion thinkers. The problem is that, nobody thinks issues down. And government is difficult to do any thinking in government. You're moving from one situation to another situation. Everything is, short term. There's no long, even service chiefs, if I may say so, come for short tenures and they go away. And so there's no continuity in any policy planning. Forget about government bureaucracy. There's zero long-term policy there. I think, we've got to really get down to all this. Reorganizing government. And this kind of shocks will come to us periodically. If we tide over this Galwan and Pangong situation, it's going to come back after 5 years.
That's true.
It's going to come back. It's going to be regular till 2050. Till we might have a chance to get our GDP off the ground and be a reasonably large economic power in the world. But till then, this will happen. So till then, you've got to be extreme, become a hard state. The problem is that we're a hard state with a soft head. Actually, we need to get a hard head and become a more soft state. Look at the way our police uses brute force on people every day. You think we're a soft state? Look at the way we use force in Chhattisgarh and wherever. Are we a soft state? It's just soft in the head. I think, by having discussions like this, you all are flagging off something very important. What kind of a country do we want to be? So, I'm very concerned at this moment about this anti-China madness which is going on. It's going to end up costing us more. We will give the same money to Taiwan, we will give the same money to Japan, we will give it to Korea. For the same stuff, we'll be paying more. So how does it benefit us? The only way you got, and we have a trade deficit every year of $120 billion. How is this country going to be rich if we consider this globalization? You see, it's inevitable there will be a trade deficit. Does Germany have a trade deficit? Dr. Rimane will tell you. They become rich at the cost of the rest of the world. They've not been any slouches either. Europe doesn't have such a big trade deficit, but we do it every year. No. So, you got to therefore get a comprehensive, like Partha says, a comprehensive national power policy going. What will our trade deficit be? What will our GDP be? What will our public health expenditure be? What will our military expenditure be? All this needs to be defined and delineated, and you work to a plan. Unless you work to a plan, we've internalized the market economy nonsense, where everything is free for all. Every lobby does what it wants. As a result, we're seeing the profusion of lobbies. And where there's a discussion of budget takes place the CIA. Parliament doesn't discuss it. Opinion leaders don't discuss it. The think tanks have all been neutralized. The only think tanks which survive in Delhi are the military think tanks. Or we have to wait for Dr. MLA to call for a conference. So I think, gentlemen, we need to take stock of the situation, the national situation, very seriously. I think we're in a very perilous situation. I generally don't speak out so frankly aloud about these things. But I think last 15 days I've been really getting upset about how I see things going.
Absolutely. I think what you said is very wrong. I think.
Hey, Marshal, can I just make one small point, please?
Please go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. You asked me about this intelligence and intelligence lapses and all. You see, we have exercises. We also exercise there every year. So do the Chinese, and we tell each other that we're going to exercise. This time, what has happened is that we didn't do it because of pandemic. The Chinese did it. They crossed the Western Highway in large numbers, and they started creeping westwards. Where were our technical intelligence assets, both civil, military? What was the RNAW doing? Did it warn the army and things like that? And then, of course, things on the ground,
DGM
and like that. So you can draw your own conclusions.
My important, concern is that, it's good to have multiple agencies and integrate them well, but are we losing critical time? There's a lot of time lag in putting things together, and that is something of a great concern. Before I open out to the questions to the audience, one last question to Ambassador Parthasarathy. Where does this now take us into the global governance issue? China and India were part of BRICS, very critical, leaders of BRICS. And now with this kind of a, problem, how do you think the BRICS will shape up? Because there is, we all know there's a power transition struggle that's going on between China and US. And there is also a, full pressure on rationalization of requirement of rationalization of the UN institution, global system, and Western dominated global system to change over to a more rational system. So where does that take us in the BRICS context?
First of all, one gets a more rational way of functioning in the United States after November. The basic problem is if the strongest power in the world becomes dysfunctional as it has, you have all sorts of things thrown in, and the Chinese have believed they can fill the vacuum. I go back to a basic fundamental. I think we have a good policy of not unnecessarily earning adversity. And I think we're one of the few countries in the world which simultaneously have been able to have good relations with two major power centers, with the Americans and the Russians. The Chinese have been a problem because of their ambitions. And I go back to what I said earlier. Firstly, as I said, I think we've missed out on maritime power. India does wield maritime power. Historically, the problem with India is that its capital is in the north. If its capital was in the south, they would have understood what Indian maritime power has meant, whether it was the Cholas or the Cheras or the Marathas. We don't understand maritime power.
That's why
you cannot face up with the Chinese just by on the land, the resources and so on. We can hold them. But if you want a larger strategy of containing them and getting them to respect you, you have to do so with the others. And I think the one thing good, if you noticed, was that when Sergei Lavrov's speech in Moscow, when our man was present and the Chinese was present, pretty clear about what he wanted, which was peace. And more importantly, within 2 days of that visit, you get a call from the Russians, hey, we're ready to give you everything you want. Now, how are the Chinese going to? There are only two countries with whom Russia has that relationship, India and Vietnam. So build up with Vietnam, build up with the Koreans, build up with the Japanese. The only way you can contain them is to deny them their oil. And you have the power to do it, provided you work with others. And the detailed planning for that, I think you should leave the blueprint to Admiral Arun Prakash. He'll do a darn good job with it. So I think let us be very clear. Air power, land power, concentrate on the defensive. Wielding power beyond, learn to use maritime power effectively. And for your Air Force guys, a bit of advice. Don't take 10 years to select an aircraft. It becomes outdated by the time you get it. And I've had that experience for 30 years.
That's true, sir. Yeah.
You asked this question about BRICS.
Yeah.
One of the early points on the agenda on BRICS was that the BRICS countries will trade with each other with bilateral currencies. You know, we pay the Chinese in rupees and they pay us in yuan, and then we balance our trade. 3 countries agreed. We didn't agree to it. Why? We kept saying globalization, globalization. This goes counter to it. Today, you would have had a balance of trade deficit with China if you were trading in yuan. And because it would have been like the old ruble trade, that they would have to buy certain goods from you. You know, we are not sure of where our interests lie. We all want to be part of every association. Every time you go somewhere, you know, we go to China, they laugh at you, saying that all you guys want is, you know, Security Council, Nuclear Supplies Group, some space group, chemical warfare group. You know, is that all you want is hankering places? So I think, you know, we look at BRICS again. The Chinese are not going to offer that deal to us. They do it with Russia, they do it with Brazil, they do it with South Africa.
That's true, sir. That's true. Let's open up for the questions. Vijay,
can I make a point before you
go ahead, sir? Please go ahead.
Yes, please go ahead, sir.
Let me pick up on Ambassador Parthasarathy's point about maritime power. A quick point to illustrate how we miss the wood for the trees. It's frequently mentioned that India has a maritime power, etc. I don't think so. About 25 years ago, somebody in China mentioned at a party conclave that China should become a maritime power. Analysts and observers all over the world said, what are they talking about? China is known to be a continental power. But the party took it up. And within a period of about 15 years, China has actually become the world's strongest maritime power in every sense of the word, because they understood what is the meaning of maritime power. It is not just having a strong navy. The Chinese PLA Navy is today the second largest navy in the world. They are the largest shipbuilding industry. They're churning out warships by the day. They are the largest merchant navy in the world. 5,000 Chinese flagged ships sail the world. Their fishing fleet is huge, the largest in the world, because Chinese look at the sea as a source of protein, fish. So Coast Guard, Navy, shipbuilding, shipping, fishing fleet. India has been talking about Sagar. The Prime Minister has mentioned Sagar. It's a very noble concept. Sagar Mala. It's a project that has been around for 20 years. No government understands what it is. They keep talking about Sagar Mala. It started with the UPA, then it came to the NDA. It is still around. Nothing has happened on the ground. Our shipyards are stagnating. Our shipping fleet is the same as it was 20 years ago. Our fishing fleet is still in canoes. Our poor fishermen go out. So we haven't understood the meaning of maritime power. And the other sad part is that had we actually gone in for real maritime power, built shipyards, shipping lines, we would have skilled our young people. We would have created millions of jobs. Our industry would have taken a quantum leap. So we need to go beyond slogans and beyond mere, just saying things, and look at implementation. And bureaucrats are not always the best people to implement things. So we need to look elsewhere amongst professionals.
Absolutely, sir. Absolutely. And I think that's a very important one. Slogans are okay, but we need to see what comes after that. And we need to actually have a clear, understanding of what strategies to evolve. And it has to have a long-term strategy. We'll come to that point in the subsequent discussions. But let me open out for the questions. And
a number of questions, sir. Yeah, go ahead. Would like to go ahead from the chat box, or shall I read out what has come in the...
One I'll read out from the chat box, then you can start. Okay, there is a question from Parth Satam. Okay. As the face-off comes in the height of US-China great power contest, where are we going, where we are growing close to one, that is the US, and have an advanced relationship with other, that is China, To what extent is the standoff therefore being viewed as a part of this new Cold War? And what future does it bode to our own relations with the US, whose actions itself have been very destabilizing, many at times in our immediate neighborhood, for example, Afghanistan and Pak in the 1971 war? Any of the panelists can give their comments.
Well, I think I'll take that one. I'll agree with you that the present US administration has been very destabilizing. Luckily, we have maintained our bilateral relationship okay with them. But they have sort of ruined American power by fighting with their allies in Europe, by getting into all sorts of ideas, and really ruining their, facing a pandemic, that their president talks of a trade deal and withholds criticism of China. So I think once you get this superpower back behaving like it normally does, we are not a people to offend any major powers or pick fights. As I go back to a very basic thing, you may call it now, I call it strategic autonomy. We are the only country with equally good relations with the Americans and the Russians. We are the only country with equally good relations with Israel and all the rich Arab countries. So I think run your home properly and be realistic about your defense planning. And frankly, defense expenditure has fallen drastically to below 2% of GDP.
1.28, sir.
This is precisely the level we came down to when the Chinese gave us a bashing in 1962.
That's true.
And then we picked up. It was a process. I mean, you can't get defense cheap. You want security for the country, and then you say, I'm going to spend 2% of GDP or less on it. And much of it goes for staff and pensions and so on and so forth. Where is your modernization? Where is your ability to build a defense industry? So I think some basic thinking needs to go into this. I agree we are going through difficult economic times in a pandemic, but somewhere down the line, we'll have to think of this. 2% of GDP in defense?
Ridiculous.
Oh, ridiculous.
There's some specific questions that come addressed to the panelists on the YouTube.
Coming by SMS, Vijay will read out on that.
Yeah, the question addressed to Ambassador Parthasarathy. So, do you see China forcing trilateral dialogue on Kashmir involving Pakistan as an alternative to the war? What's your views on this?
Listen, 2 is company, 3 is a crowd. We'll talk to Pakistan bilaterally. And right now, I think Imran Khan is having enough problems after declaring Osama bin Laden as a national hero. Yeah. And they're having problems in Afghanistan. So I think as long as we look after the situation in Kashmir, I think we did a damn good thing by knocking the way we went about doing the area reform in Kashmir. Ladakis, you talk to a Ladaki, they hate the thought of being together with the Kashmiris. They're more Tibetan in their orientation. You talk to the Jammuites, they're happy. So let us build on this, keep good governance in Kashmir, and the Chinese and the others can wait. As I said, 2 is company, 3 is a crowd in a matter like Kashmir.
Thank you, sir. This is a question addressed to Air Marshal Matheswaran. So it is addressed to you. Is it often said that 1962 would not have happened if India had brought Air Force? What is the IAF role in a war now in the present circumstances? How the government should react proactive and act fast on this? Your view, sir.
Okay, that's a very important one. It's a mystery as to why, we never used the air power, because we were far better. The Chinese had really no air power other than some bombers. The reason given is that the advice given by Ambassador Galbraith that we don't escalate, air power is escalatory, the Chinese will start bombing our cities, and therefore, other than logistics, transport fleet being used for logistics purpose, the air power was not used. In Tezpur, we had tremendous firepower. The orders were given to vacate Tezpur, demolish the aircraft, and then move away. And fortunately, the commanders held back, did nothing. The Chinese came up to Misamari and went back. Okay, we had good air power. We could have utilized it. We should have utilized it. There is a letter which I didn't want to bring it up here in the sense the letter that Prime Minister Nehru wrote on 19th of November, the one day before I think the Chinese called off, to John F. Kennedy, asking for 12 squadrons of supersonic fighters with obviously, their own manpower and pilots to take on, because we are going to lose the entire Northeast. I think that was a shameful chapter. But of course, if I mention that, the political debate that's already in the country will go off at a tangent. We don't want to do that. But I think, a lot of that origin can actually be traced back to the way we conceived about military power in 1947 when we became independent. And there is a statement when Nehru made to Chow and Lai, we are peaceful neighbors, we are civilization states, we are friends. My borders are manned by police, and that is true. Until, he woke up in the middle of 1954-55 time frame. And therefore, I think a lot of contributory factors fell into it, something that is completely unavoidable blunder. Maybe Admiral Arun Prakash can comment on that.
Admiral, would like to add on, sir?
Well, yes, but then the question arises that, with no offense to the Air Marshal, that what was the Air Force leadership doing? They should have actually proposed to the government that we have.
I asked a question to somebody.
We have enough firepower.
Go ahead, sir. Go ahead.
No, we have enough firepower. They should have offered their services. So I think it's a failure of the politicians' imagination and perhaps a little bit of hesitation on part of our Air Force leadership at that point of time. We could have used air power with very decisive effect. But I mean, there's no point harking back to the past. We should do it again in the future, surely.
That's true. Absolutely correct, sir. That's right. Yeah.
Here's a question addressed to Admiral Arun Prakash. Is there a possibility of a land warfare extending into the seas under the existing circumstances, and how prepared we are in the event of that happens?
It's most unlikely that events in the Himalayas will stretch out to the sea. So at this moment, India's maritime power should only be used as a pressure point or as a bargaining chip when we enter into negotiations with the Chinese. I don't think there's any prospect of this whole Ladakh affair developing into a naval battle. I think that can be discounted.
But our naval power will be deterrence also to China.
Exactly.
Yeah. Next, Mr. Peter Rimmel, in case you got any question, prepare yourself. Meanwhile, there's a question addressed to Mr. Mohan Guruswamy from YouTube viewers. If Mr. Great insight which you have shared, if the continuing tension escalates, what's your political and economic prognosis for the countries at this juncture? What's your one advice?
Well, I hope it doesn't progress any further. I think, we've got to get our economy back on track. The virus is going to contract our economy this year by 4.5%. That is the IMF estimate. My personal estimate is going to be something closer to 10%. And to get out of this grievous situation, we need to pump prime the economy with lots of money, which the Modi government has not been able to think about as yet. And we're losing weeks without doing anything. We need at least a $10 billion plan to revive the economy. Without that plan, we won't go anywhere. So let's hope this doesn't continue. The Chinese have got us at a particularly bad time. If we focus entirely on defense and we get ready to get into a larger scrap with China, then this will suffer. And as we've seen in the pandemic, the people who suffer are the unorganized sector. There's 200 million people who are daily wages, who will literally go hungry. So you can't have a national defense policy without providing for them first. Provide for them first and then get ready to fight your war. So you can't do both at the same time. Without doing this, you can't say it's going to have a fight. Because it's impossible. It does not happen. It cannot happen. And I think good thing for the Prime Minister at this stage is that the country gets united in times like this. And he's got a united country for a change, and he should exploit it by energizing the country economically. I think the military situation will pass if we show enough teeth at this moment. But we should be willing to show teeth
Yeah,
Mr.
thank you.
Peter, do you have a question, Mr. Peter Thamel? Please
Yes,
go
I
ahead.
do. First of all, great session today. I have a question related to a statement done by Ambassador Prakash. Ambassador, you mentioned several countries a little bit further away where India has very good relations with, and also said India should have good relations with its neighbors. I could not agree more than that. But if I look around, like China is a neighbor too, Pakistan, whatever. So with other ones, maybe it's at least not without problems. So what could or what should India do in this situation to achieve this desirable goal you have mentioned?
I see. Though we look at this region bilaterally, I think we have to identify people with whom we have common interests, and that is and there is a lot of leftist opinion here and various opinion. I have no ideological color. I think the Europeans are ideal partners, particularly the Germans and the French. The British have their own way of looking at this, and they say they are not European at the present moment. The fact of the matter is that with the Americans, with the Europeans, with the Japanese, and with all those who are suffering from Chinese aggression, whether it is Indonesia or Vietnam, get these people together to work with a common cause. But I go back to what Mohan said. Most importantly, revive the economy. And I think we should work with the world with that. And let me assure you that the Europeans have been very good partners. If you ask the Air Force, they would rather go to the French for an aircraft than to others. That is the reality. Europe has to stop living under the shadow of the United States. I'm sorry, I'm being utterly frank on that. And that is the reality. If you're partners of an alliance, you should be alliance partners as equals, without anybody dominating it. And I think with after this interregnum, after November, we can perhaps get people together to do that. So a larger global relationship of moderate democracies working together it matters. And I think with regard to our immediate neighbors, let me tell you one thing. Since the last 15 years, the Chinese have worked very hard to see that the people in the leadership of our neighboring countries is anti-Indian. They failed in Maldives, they failed in Sri Lanka, they're trying very hard in Bangladesh, they may have a temporary success in Nepal. But apart from Pakistan, there is no one who has, amongst our neighbors, sometimes we handle them less sensitively than we should. But amongst our neighbors, we can make it up because interdependence. I mean, if you talk to a Sri Lankan, he has also to a Myanmar guy. He says, I have to come to India for salvation because Lord Buddha was there. So I think exploit these things, build proper relationship with all the other neighbors. Sometimes we do make mistakes. We are only human. But I think that is crucial. And I go a step further. Like in the case of Sri Lanka, they worked projects together with Japan. I think we should expand that economically to extend it to Japan and the European Union because we share common interests. And if the EU agrees to have that common interest with us, we can work much closer in this immediate region, which is the Indian Ocean. I look at our neighborhood as the Indian Ocean.
Thank you, sir. There's a question addressed to Kamal Dawa, General. Pankaj, if you have a question, stand by.
Yes.
After this, we'll come to you. Sir, this is addressed to General. Do you think a limited war is possible? If so, how limited it can be, keeping in the interest of our opportunities and strength? And
now you're trying to take me into the realm of conjecture. Well, at the moment, you see, the things are very serious. There are troops on both sides of the line of actual control. They have also brought in their armor, their artillery. So have we done that. And, some air bases and some naval units also have been alerted, as the media reports. So anything can happen. though we hope it doesn't get on. But the fact is, we have to stand our ground. And if negotiations fail, I'm afraid India will also have to take certain strong measures. These days, the last couple of months, journalists have used a word mirroring. Why are we not taking some mirror actions? When you negotiate, as the Admiral was asking, that we must negotiate from a position of strength. Now, how do you do it on the ground? If you are not a few kilometers inside, holding on to certain features, the Chinese are not going to just, agree to you. They're no great guys or your friends, things like that. So I'm afraid at the moment, you could have a localized firefight, and one, for example, like in Kargil, we had a localized firefight, and it was restricted to the Kargil sector. Maybe something like that may just happen. In any case, whether that happens, it doesn't happen, or it escalates, we have to be ready militarily. It's as simple as that.
Pankaj, over to you, and afterwards, Air Marshal, you can.
Thank you.
Ask.
Thank you. Wonderful panel, but please keep on staying in the realm of conjecture, because my question also would ask for that. The thing is that the fact remains that China has opened too many fronts. And so it's 7, 8 fronts, even for a big country and a power like China, really, it can get into trouble opening so many fronts if all those fronts got together to act against China. So what is the psyche here? What is the thinking process? Does China have internal problems? And that's an age-old trick of diverting attention of one's own population towards external factors? Or because in this context, if we have two egotistical leaders, and it's like a loss of face for each of them, any of the country to back down. Doklam was already bad enough, though maybe this is a kind of a vindication, revenge, what? That's it. Thank you.
Air Marshal, over to you. Anybody would like to take on these questions, sir, from the panelists? Air Marshal, do you have any suggestions?
Anyone? Okay, I'll just read out a couple of questions and some comments. There are a lot of them, more than 58 messages and questions. Okay, but we have very little time, but I'll read out a couple of them. The first one is from Varadarajan, S. Varadarajan. The bullying nature of China is the result of their smart strategies and policies, long-term and definitive. With many countries around the world, they're targeting these global markets for their specific goals has created a basket for them to play different games with different country administrations. They have analyzed the SWOT for their market strategies. Can we as a nation, closely connected with China culturally and people-to-people contact, make a very radical decisions? By example, boycott their goods, make a sweeping remarks to fight them militarily? If yes, what is the most viable strategy? If not, what is the alternative or midway? Any of the panelists?
Yeah, okay, I'll try. As far as dealing with China is concerned, all the panelists have said at one time or the other that we need a coherent, well-conceived China strategy. Now, to deal a short term and a long term. Now, as far as we are at the moment talking and dealing with whatever has happened in Ladakh, how do we ensure that India does not lose any territory? As a matter of fact, whatever is their perception of the LAC and our perception of the LAC is generally quite clear. And if the Chinese have come in, let's say 2 days back, it was mentioned that they have also amassed a fair number of troops in Depsang. Well, that is something very wrong, and we cannot actually condone that. So something will have to be done by us. Some countermeasures will have to be taken. Otherwise, the Chinese will, be convinced that India is a pushover. We can bully India and things like that. So I'm afraid some action has to be taken by India, and it should be a combination of factors: military, diplomatic, economic. Also, I mean, there is a lot of hue and cry all over. I agree. Mohan has his point that we cannot, snap economic links with China. Well, maybe in the long run, yes, but at the moment, I think the Chinese would have also got the message that there are a lot of boycott of Chinese goods taking place and things like that. And, coming to this high technology and laptops and mobile phones and smartphones and all that, I mean, let's be wary of something, as far as sensitive communication equipment is concerned, or equipment with BSNL and things like that. There is something, as we all know, embedded technologies. The Chinese are great at it, apart from their hacking and their cyber warfare skills and things like that. So all this, they've been doing over a period of time. All your, your Amazons and your Flipkarts and I'm afraid what we are talking on Zoom, it's also an American company. It's with Chinese investments. So let's also be careful on all these things. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And here's a question from Commodore Vasan, Director of Center for China Studies, Chennai Center for China Studies. Does China worry about our sensitivities when it arms Pakistan to the teeth and carries out exercises in the North Arabian Sea? The time is right to corner China by being proactive and not going back to the old ways. Would Admiral Arun Prakash like to comment on that?
Sorry, what's the question?
Does China worry about our sensitivities when it arms Pakistan to the teeth and carries out exercises in the North Arabian Sea?
Okay, well, far from being worried about our sensitivities, China has in a very deliberate fashion selected Pakistan as a counterpoise to India. Way back in 1963, China made an alliance with Pakistan with the sole aim of keeping India in check. So ever since then, they've done everything possible militarily, economically. On the nuclear front, they provided them with fissionable material, weapon designs. So it's a deliberate grand strategy on part of China to prop up Pakistan as a counterpoise to India and to keep India distracted and occupied with other things rather than, and they've succeeded admirably. So having exercises in North Arabian Sea is just part of that whole grand plan of China.
May I add to what the Admiral said?
Yes, sir. Okay.
For China, Pakistan is a low-cost investment for containment of India. It's as simple as that. Nowhere in history has one country supplied another designs of nuclear weapons and multi-range missiles that the way China has done to Pakistan. That's unprecedented. And all these holy cows who have signed the non-proliferation treaty, whether in Europe or in America, they looked the other way when China did this. And they continue to do so. Never once have the Americans blamed China for proliferation to Pakistan or punished them. Under their law, they were required to do so. So, people have dual standards on all this. The China-Pakistan relationship is a marriage of convenience with the sole aim of containment of India. Let us have no doubts about it. It's now entering into the maritime field, and they're providing more frigates, submarines, and other naval equipment to Pakistan. And that is to contain us in the Arabian Sea region. So let us be very, very real about China and Pakistan's intentions. The question is, how do we mobilize people to counter that? The advantage we have is an overly aggressive China, which makes a lot of enemies, and a dysfunctional Pakistan, who can't even grow economically. So we have learned to deal with it, but deal with it coolly, calculatedly. There's no point in fretting and fuming about all this. That's a reality we have to live with.
Thank you, sir. And we are coming to the end of the session. Last two questions I'll ask. One is, of course, the first one for Mohan Guruswamy. There's a lot of slogans that have come out. We need to boycott Chinese goods. We need to, rely on indigenous self-sufficiency, make in India. Whole lot of things are there. And there's also a lot of hope that given the kind of animosity that Chinese have created across the world, a lot of industries might move out, which one has to see how realistic it is. But one of the major observations pointed out by a couple of scholars is that India is not part of any of the trading groups. We walked out of the RCES, and we are yet to be, concluding any of our trading agreements in the ASEAN. We were never part of the TPP. So how do you think that would happen? That seems to be a big bottleneck for India to actually gain anything from this current situation.
I think, we're still barking up the wrong tree out here. If you want India to be an export and an import, importer, an attraction for FDI and an export hub, then you got to reform Indian economy the way we do business in this country. You can't have existing state of things and expect anybody to come and invest here. 80% of China's exports go from Chinese companies, not from multinationals. The multinationals come to sell in your market. Ford comes to sell in India or China. Mercedes-Benz comes to sell in China or India. So, let's be real about this. Your own industry will export. And what does China do? 80% of China's export is small goods, clothes, shoes, toys, rag dolls, all kinds of things like that. You have to compete there. And for that, you got to be labor intensive and you compete on labor. You can't have Fabian standards of labor relations and expect to compete with the world. You've got to go through a phase of, and our GDP growth again has been mostly powered by the growth of public administration in this country. Services sector, we keep talking about it. IT is a very small part of it. Public administration grows at 17 to 18% a year. And now the tank has become empty. There are only fuel in the tank. You can't go any further. You got to relook this whole thing. And you got to look at these pay commissions again. This pay commission is one of the biggest frauds we play on the Indian people. 25% increments every 4 years. As a result, the government today costs 12% of GDP. You can't have these situations. And then you expect, some poor chap who's going to export shoes to come and set up a shoe factory in India. Shoe factories from India have gone to China. We used to have the biggest clock industry in the world in Rajkot. Biggest clock. All the TikTok clocks that go on there. The entire industry moved out to China. Ajanta clocks now makes clocks in China. We had one of the biggest fan industries in the world, in India. All our fans come from China now. Even Usha, which is the leading name and brand name in fans, gets 60% of its fans from China. Why? You got to seriously look at our situation as to how we do business here. Unless you use this crisis, I wish this crisis becomes worse. Then we're forced to take a hard look at things.
Thank you.
And as far as General Dawar said something about defending the land. Take the example of Vietnam in 1979. They withdrew from the provincial capital of Langson and allowed the PLA to come in before they entrapped them and beat the hell out of them. Can you give away 5 square kilometers anywhere? Before there's a human drive in this country, our sacred land is gone. It's not land, it's people who matter. It's the national honor is with people, not with land. I think our military strategists must get this right.
Thank you, Mohan. And the last question to Ambassador is, given the observations and the discussions we've brought up, the strength of a country, as they call the bureaucracy, the steel frame of the country, which is absolutely correct. And the Confucian system that was given out to the world is well proven. But do you think there is a very important requirement that this country needs to look at its bureaucratic system and restructure it completely, given the fact that we just borrowed it, or we just continued with the colonial empire's bureaucratic system and made minor modifications?
Who was that question to?
To you, sir.
Well, let me put it this way. I come from a very small service in the bureaucracy. We train hard. It really depends on the directions you give a bureaucracy. It functions under political control. Unfortunately, when politician becomes too dependent on the bureaucrat, that's where the problem arises. Otherwise, I think I know guys from the other civil services. They're very, very bright. You talk our income tax service comes under criticism, but if you go and see the way the chaps do it, international forums and rationalizing it, the way we have computerized, it's good. So I think it's a question of the political direction the bureaucracy is given. Its size is to be determined. But don't forget, we're a very complex country, and the greatest things that Sardar Patel did was to have a steel frame of the bureaucracy to integrate this country. Otherwise, you would have had things going in every that and the military. How much you spend on it, whether you're spending too much on it, that's a matter certainly of discussion and bringing it to greater efficiency and perhaps more modernizing it. I hope this experience leads to that.
Thank you very much, sir. And I think we've come to the end of the session. Before I hand over to Vijay for the vote of thanks, let me thank all the panelists from Admiral Arun Prakash, Ambassador Parthasarathi, General Dawa, and Sri Mohan Guruswamy for an exceptional exposition on the issue, on the topic. And it's been wonderful dealing with you all. Thank you so much, and the best of wishes to all of you. Vijay, all yours.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much, sir. We have more than 3,000 viewers watch this program live, logged in on YouTube, Facebook, webinar, and even Zoom. We have about 150 viewers. We have a number of questions come from them. We picked up which are very relevant to each of the panelists and which we put across. It clearly shows the concern of the nation for this topic, and where that's why we brought, and thanks to Marshal Matheswaran and Peninsula Foundation for collaborating with MMA and bringing out outstanding panelists. And thanks to each of the panelists, you have been a great insight and very invigorating, thought-provoking thought. And from the comments, what has come, you would have seen in the chat box, each one of them are really concerned about some of the things, what's happening. And thank you so much for coming together and staying with us for the 2 hours and bringing out a great insight, which will be, most of the people who are watching the program would have gone miser on this subject. Thank you, Mr. Peter and Pankaj, for joining this evening. And always, you have been a great source of support to us in bringing out some outstanding event like this. And again, thanks all the viewers. You have sent a lot of questions. Not that we could answer all the questions what you have sent. We picked up which are relevant. Thank you so much. And once again, Marshal Matheswaran, thank you for so beautifully moderating and bringing the best out of the panelists. That is very, very important, which made this event a great evening. Thank you. And each one of you, stay safe wherever you are.